Mom's becoming such a burden, my daughter whispered to her husband in the kitchen, not realizing I could hear every word. We need to get access to her savings before she wastes it all on those ridiculous painting classes. 3 days later, I walked out of their home with nothing but a small suitcase. 6 months later, I owned a beachfront gallery showcasing my ridiculous paintings, while they faced foreclosure on the house I once helped them buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The shelves of Hartwick High School's library had been my sanctuary for 38 years. Every book carefully cataloged, every student guided toward knowledge with the same gentle precision. I knew exactly where I belonged in that orderly world of Dewey Decimal numbers and reading recommendations. But retirement was uncharted territory. My last day at Hartwick High had been a blur of tearful goodbyes, handmade cards, and a potluck in the teacher's lounge where Principal Matthews presented me with a silver bookmark engraved with my name, Eleanor Wells, Librarian Emeritus, 1987-2025. I'd managed to hold my composure until 16-year-old Janie Peterson, who'd spent every lunch period of her freshman year hiding in the biography section, approached me with a bouquet of paper flowers made from the pages of discarded books. "You made the library feel like home, Mrs. Wells," she'd whispered. "I don't know who I'd be without this place." I knew exactly how she felt. Who was I without my library? That question followed me home to the empty Victorian on Maple Street where I'd lived for 43 years. The house felt both too full of memories and too void of purpose. 5 years had passed since Richard's heart attack, but sometimes I still caught myself setting 2 places at the dinner table or calling out his name when I heard a car in the driveway. Our modest home had been the setting for a lifetime of milestone moments, bringing baby Melissa home from the hospital, elementary school science projects sprawled across the dining table, teary college application nights, and eventually, Richard's hospice bed in the sunroom where he'd spent his final days. Watching the birds at our feeders, the walls held the echoes of arguments resolved, celebrations shared, and quiet Tuesday evenings when we'd read in companionable silence. Now it was just me, a widow at 65, with a reasonable pension, moderately comfortable savings, and a house that creaked with emptiness despite being filled with decades of accumulated possessions. Not wealthy by any measure, but secure enough to enjoy small comforts. Dinner with my book club friends every other Thursday, fresh flowers from the market on Sundays, and the occasional weekend trip to Maine to visit my sister Catherine. "You should downsize," Catherine had suggested during my last visit. "All those stairs can't be good for you, and the property taxes in Burlington are only going up." I'd dismissed her concern with a wave. I'm perfectly capable of managing stairs. I'm 65, not 95. But when winter hit Vermont with particular vengeance last February, Catherine's words haunted me. The driveway needed shoveling 3 times in one day during a particularly brutal storm. I'd stubbornly tackled it myself, refusing to call the neighborhood teenager who'd offered his services. By the 3rd round, exhausted and chilled, I'd slipped on a patch of black ice while carrying groceries from the car. The fall fractured my wrist and bruised both my body and my pride. "Mom, this is exactly what we've been worried about," Melissa had scolded over the phone from Charleston. My daughter's voice carried the crisp efficiency that had propelled her from humble beginnings to becoming a senior financial consultant at Meridian Partners, one of Charleston's most prestigious firms. "You shouldn't be living alone in that drafty old house, especially during Vermont winters." I'd listened to her lecture with the familiar mixture of maternal pride and mild irritation. Melissa had always been more practical than affectionate, even as a child. While other mothers received macaroni necklaces and finger paintings, Melissa presented me with neatly written book reports and math tests marked with perfect scores. She'd inherited her father's analytical mind and ambition, while I had always been the more creative, emotionally expressive one in the family. "I've managed just fine for 5 years since your father passed," I reminded her, cradling my casted wrist against my chest. That was before you were falling on ice and breaking bones, Melissa countered. Her voice softened unexpectedly, catching me off guard. Look, Mom, I've been thinking. Dad's been gone 5 years now, and that house is way too big for you to maintain alone. Why don't you sell it and move down here to Charleston? We have plenty of space, and the kids would love having you around. The offer stunned me into silence. In the decade since Melissa and her husband Greg had moved to South Carolina, they'd built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. A beautiful colonial-style home in an exclusive gated community called Palmetto Shores, prestigious matching, careers at Meridian Partners, and my 2 teenage grandchildren, Aiden and Emma, who seemed to excel at everything they attempted. Our relationship had remained cordial, but distant. I'd visit twice a year, usually around Christmas and once during summer, staying in their immaculate guest room where I always felt slightly out of place among the catalog-perfect furnishings. Conversations were pleasant, but rarely deep, focused, on the grandchildren's achievements and carefully edited highlights from our respective lives. Move to Charleston? I repeated, wondering if the pain medication was affecting my hearing. The climate would be better for your arthritis, Melissa continued, warming to her idea. And we have that bonus room above the garage that's just sitting, empty. It has its own bathroom and everything. It would be like having your own apartment, but you'd be close enough that we could check on you and you could spend time with the grandchildren. I don't need checking on, I said automatically, though the idea had already taken root in my imagination. Of course not, Melissa agreed quickly. I just meant for company. And Charleston has such a vibrant arts community. You could finally take those painting classes you've always talked about. That last part gave me pause. I'd mentioned my interest in painting exactly once during a Christmas visit 3 years ago, when Emma had received a watercolor set, and I'd shown her a few basic techniques I'd learned from library books. I was surprised Melissa had remembered. I'd have to sell the house, I said, thinking aloud, and figure out what to do with all this stuff. I glanced around at the bookshelves overflowing with decades of collected volumes, the china cabinet, filled with wedding gifts we'd rarely used, closets of clothes I seldom wore. Downsizing would be liberating, Melissa assured me. And property values in Burlington are strong right now. You could sell high, invest the proceeds, and have plenty to enjoy your retirement. Just think about it, okay? Over the next few weeks, as my wrist healed and the persistent Vermont cold seeped through my bones, I did think about it. What had once seemed like independent living now felt increasingly like isolation. My book club friends had begun migrating to Florida or Arizona, or moving closer to their own children. The neighborhood had changed, with young families replacing the familiar faces of neighbors I'd known for decades. And there were my grandchildren to consider. Aiden was 16 now, Emma 14. In a few short years, they'd be off to college, and I'd have missed their formative teenage years. The thought of being part of their daily lives, attending school concerts and sports games, helping with homework, teaching Emma to bake my mother's snickerdoodle recipe, filled me with unexpected longing. Then there were those painting classes, a dream deferred for too many years while I prioritized work and family. Charleston, with its historic architecture and coastal landscapes, would provide endless inspiration. Perhaps it wasn't too late to discover untapped artistic talent. I'd always told my library students it was never too late to learn something new. Each morning as I struggled to button my cardigan with still stiff fingers, or carefully navigated the icy front steps with newfound trepidation, Charleston's promise of warm sunshine and family connection beckoned more strongly. I called Melissa on a Sunday afternoon in late March, just as the first crocuses were pushing through the snow in my front yard. "I've been thinking about your offer," I said after our usual pleasantries. "If you're serious about having me move down there, I think I might like to give it a try." The enthusiasm in her response surprised me. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful news. Greg and the kids will be thrilled. When should we start looking at listings for your house? The spring market is about to heat up. Her eagerness to proceed took me aback, but I attributed it to Melissa's characteristic efficiency. I thought, I might come down for a visit first, I suggested, to make sure the arrangement would work for everyone. Nonsense, Melissa insisted. We already know it'll be perfect, and the sooner you list, the better price you'll get. Something in her tone, a hint of urgency I couldn't quite place, triggered a momentary hesitation, but I brushed it aside. After all, this was my daughter, looking out for my best interests. If she was excited about the prospect of having me closer, who was I to question her motives? Events moved with surprising speed after that. A real estate agent named Shelby appeared at my door the very next weekend, clipboard in hand and professional smile in place. Melissa spoke so highly of your property, she gushed, though I hadn't been aware that my daughter had discussed my house with a realtor. With a few strategic updates and proper staging, we could have this listed by the end of the month. The strategic updates turned out to be more extensive than I'd anticipated. Fresh paint throughout, new carpet upstairs, updated light fixtures, and landscaping to improve curb appeal. Each recommendation came with a contractor already lined up, ready to begin work immediately. This seems rather extensive, I ventured during a phone call with Melissa. I'm not sure I want to invest so much in a house I'm selling. Trust me, Mom, Melissa assured me. These improvements will yield a much higher sale price. I've already spoken with a financial advisor about the best way to manage the proceeds. We want to make sure your retirement is secure. Again, that note of excessive interest in my finances gave me pause. But I reminded myself that financial planning was Melissa's profession. Of course, she would approach this from an investment perspective. By early May, my house of 43 years had been transformed into a showcase property I barely recognized. Family photos had been removed from walls, personal mementos packed away, and rented furniture arranged in carefully orchestrated vignettes meant to appeal to imaginary buyers. Shelby hosted an open house that drew dozens of visitors, resulting in 3 offers all above asking price. See? I told you those improvements would pay off, Melissa said triumphantly when I called to share the news. Accept the highest offer. Before they changed their minds, I signed the papers the following day, agreeing to vacate the property within 30 days. The reality of what I'd done hit me as I stood in my bedroom that evening, surrounded by half-packed boxes. I was leaving the only home I'd known as an adult, selling the house where I'd raised my daughter and loved my husband. Was I making a terrible mistake? I called my sister Catherine, seeking reassurance. You're doing the right thing, she said, though her voice carried a note of reservation. But just to be safe, make sure you keep some of that house money in an account only you can access. Family dynamics can get complicated when living together. This is Melissa we're talking about, I reminded her, slightly offended on my daughter's behalf. She's just looking out for me. I'm sure she is, Catherine agreed, a little too quickly. But it never hurts to maintain some financial independence. Taking her advice to heart, I met with my local bank manager, Arthur Graves, who had handled our accounts since Richard and I first moved to Burlington. I'd recommend keeping a significant portion in a separate account, he concurred after I explained my situation. Would you like me to set up a transfer to your daughter's bank in Charleston? No, I said decisively, Catherine's warning echoing in my mind. I'll establish new accounts once I'm settled. For now, let's keep most of it here, with just enough transferred for my immediate needs. Arthur nodded approvingly. Very prudent. Eleanor, I'll provide you with a cashier's check for the balance when you're ready to make permanent arrangements. The day of my departure arrived with surprising swiftness. My personal belongings had been whittled down to what would fit in my Subaru wagon. Clothes, a few cherished books, family photo albums, and my small collection of art supplies. The rest had been sold, donated, or placed in a small storage unit. I'd rented despite Melissa's protests that it was an unnecessary expense. Just until I decide what I want to keep, I'd insisted, unwilling to completely sever all ties with my past life. The 16-hour drive from Burlington to Charleston gave me ample time to cycle through every emotion: grief for what I was leaving behind, anxiety about the unknown ahead, excitement for new possibilities, and a persistent whisper of doubt I couldn't quite silence. By the time I pulled into the brick-paved driveway of Melissa and Greg's imposing two-story colonial in Palmetto Shores, I was emotionally exhausted but resolute in my decision. The welcome I received was everything I could have hoped for. Greg, tall and distinguished with prematurely silver hair, grilled steaks on their expansive patio, while Melissa prepared my favorite lemon tart. The grandchildren seemed genuinely excited to have Grandma Eleanor moving in. Aiden, lanky and serious, like his mother, had cleared space on their bookshelves for my modest collection of volumes. Emma, showing the artistic temperament I recognized from my own youth, had created a handmade welcome home banner hung across the garage apartment stairs. The room above the garage had been freshly painted in a soft blue I'd once mentioned was my favorite color. A small desk sat beneath the window overlooking their manicured backyard, complete with a brand new set of watercolor paints, brushes, and sketchbooks arranged in a decorative basket. "To inspire your artistic endeavors," Melissa said with a smile I didn't yet know how to read correctly. That first evening, we sat around their formal dining table, crystal glasses catching the light from an elaborate chandelier as Greg raised a toast. "To new beginnings and family togetherness," he proclaimed, his charismatic smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Eleanor, we're so pleased you've made this decision. I know it wasn't easy to leave your home, but I promise you won't regret it." I sipped my wine, noting the label of an expensive vineyard I recognized from the rare bottles Richard had saved for special occasions. "I'm just grateful for your generosity," I said sincerely. "Not many couples would welcome their mother-in-law into their home." "Nonsense," Melissa dismissed with a wave of her hand. "It makes perfect sense. You get a fresh start. We get the pleasure of your company, and the children benefit from your wisdom and experience. Everyone wins." The following days passed in a pleasant blur as I settled into my new routine. I unpacked my belongings, arranged my books on the shelves Aiden had cleared, and set up a small painting corner near the window with the best light. The garage apartment was comfortable if compact, a main room that served as bedroom and living area, a small bathroom with a shower stall, and a kitchenette with a mini refrigerator and microwave. "You won't need to cook much," Melissa had explained. "You'll take most meals with us. No sense in you eating alone up here." I appreciated the inclusion, though I sometimes missed the quiet solitude of my own kitchen, where I could prepare exactly what I wanted when hunger struck. Still, joining the family for meals provided structure to my days and regular interaction with my grandchildren, which was precisely what I'd hoped for in making this move. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed ideal. I helped Emma with her English essays, recognizing in her writing the same love of language that had drawn me to literature. I listened to Aiden practice his saxophone, impressed by his dedication, if not always his intonation. And I began researching local painting classes, excited to discover that the Charleston Cultural Center offered workshops specifically for seniors. I'd set aside $5,000 from my house sale specifically for art supplies and classes, a modest indulgence after a lifetime of frugality. When I mentioned this at dinner one evening, planning to sign up for a 12-week introductory painting course, I noticed a quick glance between Melissa and Greg, a subtle raising of eyebrows that felt oddly judgmental. $5,000. Seems rather excessive for a hobby, Melissa commented, her tone carefully neutral but her expression suggesting otherwise. Especially when you're just starting out. Maybe begin with something less ambitious? "I've waited 40 years to pursue this interest," I said mildly. "I'd like to give myself the best opportunity to develop whatever talent I might have." Greg cleared his throat. "Of course, Eleanor. It's your money. We just want to make sure you're being cautious with your retirement funds," These years need to stretch further than you might expect. I should have registered the presumptuous nature of that comment, the implied authority over my financial decisions. I should have noticed how Melissa casually asked about my banking arrangements the next morning, suggesting I might want to establish a joint account for convenience in case of emergency. But I was too caught up in my newfound freedom, too grateful for this chance to reinvent myself at 65. Until that evening, 3 weeks after I'd arrived, when I overheard the conversation that would change everything. It was a Wednesday evening, in late May. The Charleston humidity hung heavy in the air, creating a sticky warmth that my Vermont constitution hadn't yet adjusted to. I'd spent the afternoon sketching the magnolia tree that dominated the backyard, pleased with how my rudimentary skills were developing after just a few weeks of practice. Dinner had been pleasant enough. Lasagna I'd helped Emma prepare, with garlic bread and a simple salad. Afterward, I'd excused myself early, claiming fatigue, though in truth I simply wanted the solitude of my garage apartment to continue working on my magnolia drawing. I was halfway up the exterior stairs when I realized I'd left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter. Turning back, I approached the partially open French doors that led from the patio into the kitchen. Voices drifted through the gap, Melissa and Greg speaking in hushed but intense tones. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "Mom's becoming such a burden," Melissa said, her voice carrying a sharp edge I'd never heard directed at me before. "And did you see her today? 3 hours drawing a tree. A tree, Greg. Meanwhile, she's done nothing about arranging the transfer of her house proceeds." Greg's response was quieter, forcing me to step closer to the doors. "She'll come around. Your mother's always been easy to manage. We just need to be strategic." "We've been strategic for weeks," Melissa countered, frustration evident in her tone. "The house sold faster than we expected, the market's favorable, but she's dragging her feet on consolidating accounts. We need to get access to her savings before she wastes it all on those ridiculous painting classes." My blood turned to ice despite the muggy evening air. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the doorframe for support as my daughter continued. $5,000 for art supplies? That's almost a mortgage payment right there, she scoffed. And now she's talking about joining that gallery co-op downtown. Do you know what membership fees for those places run? To be fair, Greg said, his tone measured. It is her money. Retirement accounts, house sale. All has to be at least $500,000. Exactly, Melissa replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that nonetheless carried clearly to where I stood. $500,000 that should be securing our children's future and paying off our debts, not funding some ridiculous artistic midlife crisis. We didn't invite her here so she could squander her assets on hobbies. Greg sighed audibly. The market correction hit everyone hard, Melissa. It's not just us. We're underwater on both mortgages, Greg. The Charleston property is one thing, but that beach house in Folly was supposed to be our safety net, not another drain. The rental income barely covers half the monthly payment. The market will recover, Greg insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Not fast enough. We've got college tuition for 2 kids coming up, and Meridian's already hinting at another round of layoffs. We need Mom's funds as a cushion until things stabilize. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. My mind raced, piecing together a disturbing puzzle. The eager assistance with selling my house, the push for me to relocate. Quickly, the suggestions about joint accounts. It hadn't been about family togetherness at all. My daughter and son-in-law were drowning in debt and saw my retirement savings as their financial life raft. We need to accelerate the plan, Melissa continued, her voice hardening. I've already called Dr. Harrington. One evaluation saying she's showing early signs of cognitive decline, and we can petition for financial guardianship. She's already agreed to put my name on her medical directives. Isn't that a bit extreme? Greg asked, though his objection sounded perfunctory. She seems pretty sharp to me. It's preventative. Melissa insisted. Look, Mother spent her entire career surrounded by books, not people. She has no financial acumen whatsoever. Dad managed all their money. We're doing her a favor by stepping in before she depletes her nest egg on watercolors and pottery classes. I backed away from the door, my legs trembling beneath me. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. All my life I'd put Melissa first, scraping together college tuition by working extra shifts at the library, postponing my own dreams so she could pursue hers, supporting her career choices even when they took her far from home. And now she saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be tapped, an inconvenient elder to be managed and manipulated. Somehow I made it up the stairs to my apartment, closing the door silently behind me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding, in my ears. The magnitude of my mistake crashed over me in waves. I'd sold my home, left my community, abandoned the life I'd built in Vermont, all to become an unwitting solution to my daughter's financial troubles. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found Catherine's number. My finger hovered over the call button, but pride stopped me from pressing it. How could I admit to my sister that she'd been right all along? That the daughter I'd defended so vigorously saw me as nothing more than a burden and a bank account? Instead, I opened my laptop and navigated to my online banking portal. The proceeds from my house sale, $437,286 after closing costs and the real estate agent's commission, sat in the Burlington Community Bank, untouched except for the $15,000 I'd transferred to a Charleston account for immediate expenses. Thanks to Arthur's insistence and my own lingering caution, the bulk of my financial security remained beyond Melissa and Greg's reach. But for how long? My daughter was intelligent, determined, and apparently desperate. The mention of Dr. Harrington and cognitive evaluations sent a chill through me. They were planning to declare me incompetent, to take legal control of my finances under the guise of protection. And I had unwittingly given them the perfect opportunity by moving into their home, isolating myself from anyone who knew me well enough to contest such claims. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, gazing out at the darkened yard below. The magnolia tree I'd spent hours sketching stood as a silent witness to my turmoil, its waxy leaves gleaming faintly in the security lights. I'd always taken pride in being a practical woman, not given to rash decisions or emotional outbursts. Now I needed that pragmatism more than ever. Sleep evaded me that night as I mentally cataloged my options. I could confront Melissa and Greg directly, but that would likely accelerate their plans for financial guardianship. I could return to Vermont, but my house was sold, my possessions dispersed. I could move in with Catherine, but the thought of arriving on her doorstep, homeless and humiliated, was unbearable. By dawn, I'd made my decision. If I was to reclaim my autonomy and secure my future, I would need to act decisively and discreetly. Years of recommending mystery novels to library patrons had taught me the importance of careful planning when orchestrating an escape. The next morning at breakfast, I performed the role of oblivious mother with Oscar-worthy precision. I commented on the weather, asked about the children's activities for the day, and mentioned that I planned to visit the Charleston Cultural Center to inquire about those painting classes. "Is that really necessary?" Melissa asked, buttering her toast with short, irritated strokes. "I thought we agreed you'd start with something less intensive." "I'm just gathering information," I assured her mildly. "No commitments yet." Greg glanced up from his phone. "While you're downtown, you might stop by Coastal Federal. I've arranged for a meeting with their financial advisor to discuss your accounts. I took the liberty of setting it up. 2:00. I nodded agreeably. "How thoughtful. I'll try to make it." As soon as they left for work and the children for school, I began my counteroffensive. First, I called Arthur at Burlington Community Bank, my voice low despite being alone in the house. "Eleanor," he greeted warmly. "How's Charleston treating you?" "Not quite as expected," I replied, keeping my tone neutral in case Melissa had some way of monitoring calls. "I'm calling about my accounts." "Of course. What can I help you with?" "I need to ensure that no one can access my funds without my explicit authorization. No joint account holders, no power of attorney, nothing. And I need to know my options for transferring funds quickly if necessary." A brief silence followed. When Arthur spoke again, his voice carried a note of concern. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "Just being cautious," I assured him. "Family dynamics can be complicated when living together." "I understand," he said, and I suspected he truly did. "Let me outline your options." Arthur confirmed what I'd hoped. My accounts remained secure, accessible only to me. We discussed wire transfers, cashier's checks, and digital banking options. Before ending the call, he added, "Eleanor, Vermont has strong elder protection laws. If you're experiencing any form of financial exploitation, there are resources available." "Thank you, Arthur," I said softly. "I'll keep that in mind." My next call was to an attorney I'd found through an online search, Marjorie Simmons, specializing in elder law and estate planning. Her secretary scheduled a video consultation for the following day, no in-person visit required. With my financial flank secured, I turned to practical matters. I methodically photographed my few valuable possessions in the garage apartment. Jewelry Richard had given me over the years, my grandmother's silver locket, the first edition Frost collection I'd received upon retirement. I uploaded the images to a secure cloud account, along with scans of important documents I'd fortunately brought with me: birth certificate, social security card, insurance policies. Then I began researching accommodations, focusing on extended stay, hotels and furnished apartments in the historic district of Charleston. I wasn't ready to flee the city entirely, partly out of concern for my grandchildren, whom I suspected knew nothing of their parents' schemes, and partly out of stubborn determination not to be driven away. If Charleston had a vibrant arts community, as Melissa had claimed, perhaps it could still offer the fresh start I'd been seeking, just not in the way I'd initially envisioned. By noon, I'd identified a promising option: the Palmetto House, a residential hotel catering to snowbirds and visiting professors that offered monthly rates and a convenient downtown location. I called to inquire about availability and was pleased to learn they had a studio unit opening the following week. "I'd like to reserve it," I said, providing my credit card information. "And I wonder if you might have any recommendations for secure storage facilities nearby? I have some items that won't fit in the studio." The helpful desk clerk provided several options, which I researched online before calling to reserve a small unit at Charleston Secure Storage, less than a mile from the Palmetto House. Each step I took lightened the weight pressing on my chest, replacing despair with determination. Instead of visiting the cultural center as planned, I took a rideshare downtown to scout my future home in person. The Palmetto House occupied a handsomely restored Victorian on Wentworth Street, its sage green exterior and wide verandas exuding Southern charm. The studio unit would be small but functional, with a kitchenette, updated bathroom, and access to the house's common areas: parlor, library, and walled garden. I deliberately missed Greg's scheduled financial advising appointment, turning off my phone to avoid the inevitable calls. When I returned to Melissa and Greg's home late that afternoon, I was met with poorly concealed irritation. "We were worried," Melissa said, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You missed your appointment at Coastal Federal." "I'm so sorry," I replied, infusing my voice with genuine-sounding regret. "I got completely turned around downtown. Charleston's streets are so confusing to a newcomer. By the time I found my bearings, it was too late. I hope it wasn't too much trouble to reschedule." Greg's jaw tightened. "Kevin is doing us a favor fitting you in. He's usually booked weeks in advance." "I truly appreciate the effort," I said. "Perhaps next time you could accompany me? I'd value your expertise." The flattery worked as intended, smoothing Greg's ruffled feathers. "I'll see what I can arrange." For the next 3 days, I maintained an elaborate charade. I expressed interest in the financial planning they suggested, asked questions about local banks, and even brought up the topic of updating my will, all while secretly finalizing my escape plan. Each night after dinner, I would retreat to my apartment above the garage and methodically prepare for my departure. I sorted through my belongings, setting aside essential items and those with sentimental or financial value. I discreetly packed small batches of clothing and personal effects into canvas tote bags, which I stored in the trunk of my car under the pretense of donating old items to a local charity. I withdrew cash in small amounts from ATMs across Charleston, never using the same machine twice. The video consultation with Marjorie Simmons proved invaluable. After explaining my situation, carefully framing it as a hypothetical scenario until I was certain our communication was secure, she outlined steps to protect myself from financial exploitation. Based on what you've described, she said, her gray hair and practical demeanor visible on my laptop screen, I'd recommend immediately creating a new estate plan that specifically excludes your daughter from any fiduciary role. Additionally, I suggest executing a durable power of attorney, naming someone other than family members, perhaps a trusted friend or professional fiduciary. And if my daughter attempts to challenge my competence? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Documentation is your strongest defense. Regular cognitive assessments with an independent physician, dated financial records showing sound management, even daily journals demonstrating clear thinking. Should you need to establish residency elsewhere, do so officially. Driver's license, voter registration, tax documents. Create a paper trail that contradicts any narrative of impairment. I took detailed notes, comforted by having a concrete strategy. Before ending the call, Marjorie added, Mrs. Wells, financial exploitation of elders is unfortunately common, even within families. You're not alone, and you're taking exactly the right steps to protect yourself. On Saturday morning, exactly. 1 week after overhearing that devastating conversation, I set my plan in motion. Melissa and Greg had taken the children to a soccer tournament in Columbia, not expected to return until late evening. I'd begged off, claiming a migraine, which they accepted with minimal concern. As soon as their car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. I transferred the remaining items from my apartment to my car, carefully arranged to appear as normal luggage for anyone who might notice. I did a final sweep of the space, ensuring I'd left nothing of value behind. On the desk, I placed a sealed envelope addressed to Emma and Aiden, a letter explaining my departure in terms they might understand, expressing my love for them independent of my feelings about their parents' actions, and providing a secure email address where they could reach me when they were ready. Before leaving, I performed one final act of resistance. Using Melissa's own printer in the home office, I created a document that detailed the conversation I'd overheard, including direct quotes about their plans for financial guardianship. I outlined their references to underwater mortgages and financial struggles, their intention to use my retirement savings to solve their problems, and their dismissive attitude toward my artistic aspirations. I printed 3 copies, one to keep with me, one to mail to my attorney, and one to leave on Melissa's immaculate kitchen island, alongside the key to the garage apartment. At the bottom of the document, I added a simple postscript. I may be a burden to you, but my financial resources will not be. By the time you read this, I will have established residence elsewhere and taken steps to legally protect my assets. I raised you to be many things, Melissa, but never a thief of an old woman's dreams. With a strange sense of calm, I gathered my belongings, took one last look at the home I'd briefly occupied, and walked to my car. I felt lighter with each step, as though shedding an invisible weight. The betrayal still stung, a wound that would likely never fully heal, but it no longer threatened to consume me. My first stop was Charleston Secure Storage, where I unloaded items I wouldn't immediately need at the Palmetto House. Next came a visit to the DMV to begin the process of obtaining A South Carolina driver's license, the first step in establishing legal residency separate from my daughter's household. I purchased a new phone with a Charleston number, ensuring Melissa couldn't track my movements through the family plan she'd insisted I join. By late afternoon, I was settled in my studio at the Palmetto House, unpacking essentials and arranging my art supplies near the window that overlooked a courtyard garden lush with camellias and crepe myrtles. The space was smaller than the garage apartment, but undeniably mine. A sanctuary secured with a lease in only my name, paid 3 months in advance from my own independent account. I sat at the small desk by the window, gazing at the historic church steeple visible beyond the garden wall. For the first time since overhearing that devastating conversation, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. Tears came then, not the helpless tears of a victim, but the cleansing tears of someone shedding an old skin, making space for transformation. After decades of defining myself primarily as a mother, a wife, a librarian, roles in service to others, I was finally stepping into a new identity crafted entirely on my own terms. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to determine, free from manipulation or exploitation. As twilight descended over Charleston, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw. Not the careful, hesitant lines of my earlier attempts, but bold strokes filled with conviction. On the page emerged a bird, not in a cage as the metaphor might suggest, but perched at its open door, wings half spread, poised at the threshold. Between captivity and flight, I had no way of knowing what awaited me in this new chapter. I couldn't predict Melissa and Greg's reaction to my departure, or how it might affect my relationship with my grandchildren. The financial and emotional terrain ahead was unmapped, potentially treacherous. But for the first time in years, perhaps even decades, I felt truly alive, fully present in my own story. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Had Melissa already discovered my absence? I hesitated before opening it, bracing for recriminations or demands. Instead, I found a message from Marjorie Simmons's office, confirming our in-person appointment for Monday morning to formalize my new estate plan. Below the confirmation details, Marjorie had added a personal note. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in the face of it. I look forward to helping you secure your future on your own terms. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes and lightened my heart. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, practical, legal, and emotional hurdles to navigate. But tonight, in this room that represented my first act of self-determination in longer than I could remember, I allowed myself to simply be Eleanor Wells, 65 years old, artist in progress, author of her own next chapter. I picked up a brush, dipped it in the rich blue watercolor I'd so carefully transported from Vermont to Charleston, and began to paint the twilight sky behind my half-liberated bird. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not an escape, but an emergence. My first morning at the Palmetto House, I woke to sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains and the distant sound of church bells. For a moment, disorientation clouded my mind. This wasn't the garage apartment, nor my Vermont home. Then memory rushed back, bringing with it a curious mixture of grief and liberation. I checked my phone, bracing myself for the barrage of messages I expected from Melissa. Surprisingly, there were none. Either she hadn't yet discovered my absence, or she was too stunned, or perhaps too calculating, to respond immediately. Either way, the reprieve was welcome. The Palmetto House included a continental breakfast served in a sun-dappled dining room downstairs. I dressed carefully in one of my better outfits, a linen blouse and tailored slacks, applied light makeup, and ventured down to face my new community. The dining room was half filled with other residents, most appearing to be in their 60s, or 70s like myself. A few looked up with polite smiles as I entered, then returned to their conversations and newspapers. I filled a plate with fruit and a croissant, poured a cup of coffee, and selected a small table by the window. I'd barely taken my first sip when a woman approached, coffee mug in hand. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Brooklyn accent. She was about my age, perhaps a bit older, with a cap of silver hair framing a face lined by laughter rather than worry. "I'm Vivian Cohen. Just moved in last week." "Eleanor Wells," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Just arrived yesterday, actually." "Another refugee," Vivian said with a knowing smile. "We all have our stories for landing. Here, divorce? Death? Or just escaping winter up north?" The directness of her question startled a laugh from me. "None of the above, actually. It's complicated." Vivian nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The best stories always are." She sipped her coffee. "What brought you to Charleston?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to a stranger. But there was something about Vivian's forthright manner that invited confidence. "My daughter lives here. I sold my home in Vermont to move closer to her and my grandchildren, but the arrangement didn't work out as expected." "Ah," Vivian said, a world of comprehension in that single syllable. "Family. The most complicated story of all." She didn't press for details, instead shifting to lighter topics. "Have you explored Charleston yet? The historic district is just magical, especially this time of year before the worst of the summer heat sets in." Our conversation flowed easily from there. I learned that Vivian was a retired sociology professor from NYU who had fallen in love with Charleston during a conference 5 years earlier and had finally made the move permanent after her partner, of 30 years, had taken a teaching position at the College of Charleston. She knew the city intimately and offered suggestions for galleries, cafes, and hidden courtyards I might enjoy. By the time we'd finished our coffee, I felt I'd found not just a neighbor, but perhaps a friend. "There's a group of us that meets for happy hour on the veranda on Sunday evenings," Vivian said as we parted. "Very informal. Join us if you'd like." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised to discover I truly meant it. Back in my studio, I created a list of priorities for the day. First was banking. I needed to establish local accounts that only I could access. Second was transportation, while my Vermont-registered Subaru would serve for now. I'd need to address registration and insurance if I planned to stay in South Carolina. Third was furnishing my new space. The Palmetto House provided basics, but lacked the personal touches that would make it feel truly mine. I had just finished my list when my phone rang. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, then answered with deliberate calm. "Hello, Melissa. Where are you?" Her voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury I recognized from her childhood tantrums. "We came home last night to find your things gone and that ridiculous note." "I've moved to my own place," I said simply, as my note explained. "Without telling us? Without even discussing it?" The pitch of her voice rose with each question. "We've been worried sick. We thought something had happened to you." The concern might have seemed genuine had I not overheard her true feelings just days earlier. "I find that hard to believe, considering your recent conversations with Greg about my status as a burden and your plans regarding my finances." A beat of silence. Then, "I don't know what you think you heard." "I know exactly what I heard," I interrupted, surprising us both with my firmness. "Your plans to declare me cognitively impaired to gain control of my assets. Your dismissal of my artistic interests as a ridiculous midlife crisis. Your intention to use my retirement savings to solve your financial problems. You're completely misinterpreting." "No, Melissa, I'm not. For once, I'm seeing things exactly as they are." I kept my voice steady, determined not to give her the emotional outburst she likely expected. "I've moved somewhere safe, established, independent banking arrangements, and consulted with an attorney. I suggest you use your considerable intelligence to address your financial troubles without involving my resources. Mom, she said, her tone shifting to one I recognized. The reasonable, slightly patronizing voice she used when explaining something, she considered beyond my comprehension. You're making a terrible mistake. We only want what's best for you. These independent arrangements you've made. Do you even understand the tax implications? The long-term care considerations? You need our help. What I need, I replied, is respect. What I need is the freedom to pursue interests I've deferred for decades while raising you and supporting your father. What I need is to be valued as more than a financial resource. This is absurd, Melissa snapped, abandoning the reasonable facade. Where are you staying? Some Fleabag motel? With our grandchildren here in a beautiful home with their own grandmother just a few minutes away? Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? The irony was so profound I nearly laughed. I'm in a lovely residential hotel in the historic district. As for selfishness, yes, I'm finally thinking of myself after a lifetime of putting others first. It's quite refreshing. I recommend it. The money from the Vermont house, she said, cutting to her real concern. What have you done with it? Secured it, I answered simply. Beyond your reach. That money should be helping this family. Her control shattered entirely. Do you know what Greg and I have sacrificed to build this life? The market crashed. Our investments tanked. We're drowning here. That money could save us. Perhaps you should have been honest about your situation. Instead of manipulating me under the guise of family closeness, I suggested. I might have been willing to help if asked directly, but I will not be exploited. Fine, she said, her voice cold. Stay in your hotel. Waste your money on paint and canvas. When it runs out, don't come crawling back to us. I won't, I assured her. And Melissa? I left a letter for Aiden and Emma. I hope you'll allow them to read it. They're devastated by your abandonment, she replied. I'm not sure they'd want to hear from you. The jab was calculated to wound, and it did. My relationship with my grandchildren was precious to me, and the thought of losing it created a physical ache in my chest. But I couldn't allow Melissa to use them as emotional leverage. They know how to reach me when they're ready, I said, then ended the call before she could respond. I sat for several minutes afterward, breathing deeply, waiting for my racing heart to calm. I'd rehearsed versions of this conversation in my mind, but the reality had been both worse and better than I'd imagined. Worse in the naked greed Melissa had revealed, better in my own unexpected strength. I had stood my ground without crumbling, without giving in to manipulation disguised as concern. My phone immediately rang again, Melissa calling back, no doubt with fresh arguments or threats. I silenced it, then turned to my computer to research how to block specific numbers. By the time I'd figured it out, she'd called 3 more times and left voicemails I chose not to listen to. I added Greg's number to the blocked list as well, then sat back, feeling simultaneously liberated and exhausted. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical matters. I opened accounts at a local credit union, commissioned new checks, and arranged for my Social Security deposits to be redirected there. I visited a home goods store to purchase a few items to personalize my studio: a colorful throw pillow, a small lamp with a stained glass shade, a potted orchid for the windowsill. Each decision, no matter how small, felt like an affirmation of my independence. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a small bistro Vivian had recommended, just a short walk from the Palmetto house. Sitting alone at a table on the cobblestone patio, savoring sea bass and a glass of crisp white wine, I found myself observing the other diners, couples leaning close in conversation, friends laughing over shared plates, families navigating the complexities of restaurant behavior with young children. For the first time, solitude didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like possibility. Monday morning arrived with renewed purpose. I met with Marjorie Simmons at her office in a converted Charleston single house on Queen Street, its piazza shaded by a massive magnolia tree similar to the one I'd sketched in Melissa's yard. Marjorie proved as formidable in person as she had been in our video consultation. A woman in her early 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perched on a chain around her neck, her handshake firm and reassuring. "I've prepared draft documents based on our discussion," she said, motioning me to a chair across from her desk. "We'll review them today, make any necessary adjustments, and then finalize them." For the next 2 hours, we meticulously worked through legal protections that would secure my autonomy, a new will that specifically excluded Melissa from any fiduciary role and left my estate to my grandchildren in trust, accessible only when they reached age 25. A durable power of attorney naming Catherine as my agent, with Marjorie herself as backup. Advance healthcare directives that clearly stated my wishes and designated decision-makers who weren't family members. "These documents create a strong framework," Marjorie explained, "but I also recommend a letter from a geriatric specialist confirming your cognitive capacity. Given what you've told me about your daughter's intentions, a preemptive evaluation would carry significant weight should she attempt to challenge your competence." I nodded, pushing aside discomfort at the thought of needing to prove my soundness of mind. "Can you recommend someone?" Dr. Eleanor Gadsden at the Medical University of South Carolina. "She's the best in her field and serves as an expert witness in guardianship cases. I'll have my assistant schedule an appointment." As Marjorie finalized the paperwork for me to sign, she looked up with an expression of professional admiration. "Many clients in your situation wait until the damage is done before seeking help. Your proactive approach is commendable." "I spent my career helping others navigate information," I replied with a small smile. "Research and preparation come naturally." "Well, your librarian skills have served you well," Marjorie said. "These protections would be much harder to establish after a guardianship petition had been filed." I left her office with a portfolio of signed documents and a renewed sense of security. The legal safeguards wouldn't heal the wound of Melissa's betrayal, but they would ensure that my future remained my own to determine. The remainder of the week unfolded in a rhythm that gradually began to feel like a new normal. Each morning, I breakfasted in the dining room, often joining Vivian and occasionally other residents she introduced me to: Harriet, a retired judge from Philadelphia; Marcus, a widower who had owned a successful restaurant in Atlanta; Elena, a former concert pianist who now taught at the College of Charleston. During the days, I explored my new city, walking the historic streets with a sketchbook tucked into my bag, stopping to capture architectural details or the play of light through live oak branches draped with Spanish moss. I visited galleries and museums, attended a free watercolor demonstration at an art supply store, and began to familiarize myself with the bus routes that would allow me to navigate Charleston without always relying on my car. In the evenings, I often dined alone but began occasionally accepting invitations to join Vivian and her partner Rebecca for dinner, or to attend small gatherings in the Palmetto House's common areas. Each interaction, each new acquaintance, expanded my world a little further beyond the constricted space I'd occupied as Melissa's mother or the grandchildren's grandmother. I had no further direct contact with Melissa or Greg that week, though I knew from my blocked call log that they had tried to reach me multiple times. What did surprise me was a text message from a number I didn't recognize on Thursday afternoon. "Grandma, it's Emma. Mom doesn't know I'm texting. Got your letter." "Are you really okay? Why did you leave?" My heart contracted at the simple message. I saved the number immediately and composed a careful reply. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm really okay. I left because your parents and I had different ideas about my retirement. I'm living in a nice place downtown where I can take art classes like I've always wanted. This doesn't change how much I love you and Aiden. I'm still here in Charleston and hope to see you both when possible." Her response came quickly. "Mom says you abandoned us. Dad says you're confused and made a mistake. I closed my eyes briefly, pained by their manipulation of my grandchildren, but determined not to respond in kind. I'm sorry they see it that way. I'm not confused. I made a choice to live independently, which many people my age prefer. I didn't abandon you. I'm still very much here and thinking of you every day. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before her. Next message arrived. Can we meet sometime? Just to talk? I'd like that very much, I replied. Maybe this weekend? We could have lunch downtown. I'll try to figure it out. Don't tell Mom. The secrecy troubled me, but I understood her position. Be careful about hiding things from your parents. Maybe suggest to them that seeing me would help you understand what's happening. She didn't respond after that, but the brief exchange left me hopeful that my relationship with my grandchildren might survive this rupture. Sunday evening found me on the wide veranda of the Palmetto House, joining the informal happy hour Vivian had mentioned. About a dozen residents gathered in wicker chairs and rockers, sipping wine or iced tea, sharing stories and laughter as the sun cast long shadows across the garden. I sat somewhat apart, still adjusting to the social dynamics of my new home when Marcus approached with a glass of red wine extended toward me. You look like you could use this, he said, his deep voice carrying the gentle lilt of coastal Georgia. Thank you, I replied, accepting both the wine and his company as he settled into the chair beside mine. Vivian mentioned you're an artist, he said, nodding toward the sketchbook that had become my constant companion. Aspiring artist, I corrected with a self-deprecating smile. I'm just beginning to explore what might have been a path not taken. Ah, he nodded thoughtfully. The road's not traveled. I have a few of those myself. He gazed out at the garden, his profile strong against the twilight sky. My Margaret, my late wife, she always wanted to see Paris. We were going to go for our 40th anniversary, had it all planned out. Then she got sick and he trailed off, the story completing itself in the silence. I'm sorry, I said softly. After she passed, I couldn't bear the thought of going without her. He sipped his wine. 3 years later, I finally went, scattered some of her ashes in the Seine, cried like a baby right there on the Pont Neuf. His mouth curved in a gentle smile. And then I felt her kick me in the behind, metaphorically speaking, telling me to get on with living. And did you? Get on with living? I'm trying. He turned to face me, his eyes warm with understanding. That's what we're all doing here, isn't it? Trying to figure out this next chapter, this life we didn't exactly plan for. I nodded, unexpectedly moved by his candor. My chapter's just beginning. I'm not sure where the story goes from here. That's the beauty of it, Marcus said, raising his glass in a small toast. You get to write it yourself now. Our conversation drifted to lighter topics. Favorite restaurants in Charleston, books we'd recently read, his grandchildren in Atlanta whom he visited monthly. As the gathering dispersed for dinner, he asked casually if I might like to join. Him at the farmer's market on Saturday morning? They have a wonderful art fair alongside the produce vendors, he explained. Some exceptional local talent, might be inspirational for your own work. I hesitated only briefly before accepting. It wasn't a date exactly, just 2 new friends exploring the city together. But it felt significant nonetheless, this small step toward connection unmediated by family obligation or past history. That night, preparing for bed in my gradually personalizing studio, I found myself humming as I arranged my new purchases. A vase of fresh flowers for the windowsill, art books stacked neatly on the small table, the hand-woven throw from the market draped across the foot of the bed. It wasn't home yet, not quite, but it was becoming mine in a way that reflected my own choices rather than others' expectations. My phone chimed with an email notification. I checked it with mild curiosity, expecting perhaps a newsletter from one of the galleries I'd visited or confirmation of my upcoming appointment with Dr. Gadsden. Instead, I found a message from an attorney representing Melissa and Greg, formally requesting a meeting to discuss financial matters of mutual concern. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my chest, but it lacked the paralyzing power it had held just days earlier. I forwarded the email to Marjorie with a brief note. "They're escalating. How should I respond?" Her reply came within minutes. Despite the late hour, "Not at all for now. Let me handle this. Your legal protections are in place. Focus on building your new life." I set the phone aside, determined not to let this development derail my progress. Melissa had played her next card, as expected, but the game had changed. I was no longer a passive participant, reacting to others' moves. I was actively creating my own position on this complex board. I opened my sketchbook to the drawing of the bird poised at its cage door, wings half spread in anticipation of flight. With careful strokes, I revised the image, moving the bird fully outside the cage, its wings extended in the freedom of open sky. As I worked, I realized this wasn't merely a metaphorical representation of my journey. It was the beginning of something more. A series, perhaps, exploring the theme of liberation, of identities shed and discovered, of courage found late, but not too late. For the first time, I felt not just the relief of escape, but the thrill of possibility. What talent might I discover within myself, now that I had the freedom to explore it? What connections might I form, now that I was engaging with the world as myself, rather than as an extension of others? What joy might I find in this unexpected chapter of my life? The Charleston night was warm and fragrant with jasmine as I closed my sketchbook and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, practical, legal, and emotional hurdles to navigate. But tonight, in this room that represented my first true act of self-determination in decades, I allowed myself to simply be Eleanor Wells, 65 years old, artist in progress, author of her own next chapter, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep smiling. The Charleston Farmers Market sprawled across Marion Square, white tents billowing gently in the late May breeze. I arrived early that Saturday morning, watching vendors arrange heirloom tomatoes in rainbow gradients, stack fragrant peaches in wooden crates, and display jars of golden honey against the rising sun. The sense of abundance, of life's simple pleasures arrayed for appreciation, matched my growing feeling of possibility. Marcus arrived precisely at 9, as promised, wearing a Panama hat and carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "I hope you don't mind," he said, offering one to me. "I remembered you mentioned liking it black." The small act of consideration, noticing my coffee preference from a casual mention days earlier, warmed me more than the beverage itself. "Thank you," I said, accepting the cup with a smile. I was just admiring the produce. Everything looks so fresh compared to our Vermont markets. Our growing season doesn't truly begin until June. "One of the joys of the Low Country," Marcus agreed, "though I suspect you'll miss your northern autumn. Charleston has many charms, but fall foliage isn't among them." We wandered through the market, pausing to admire particularly beautiful displays or chat with vendors about their offerings. Marcus seemed to know many of them by name, introducing me as my new friend Eleanor, an artist from Vermont. "Aspiring artist," I corrected each time, growing less self-conscious about the designation with each repetition. "Everyone starts somewhere," he replied with gentle wisdom. "The distinction isn't whether you're paid or acclaimed, it's whether you create. By that measure, you're already an artist." The art section of the market occupied the southern edge of the square, where painters, potters, jewelry makers, and woodworkers displayed their creations. We moved slowly from booth to booth, admiring the diverse expressions of creativity. Some pieces were technically impressive, but left me unmoved. Others, though perhaps less polished, resonated with authentic emotion. at a stall displaying watercolor. Landscapes of the Carolina coast, Marcus paused, studying a painting of a weathered lighthouse against a stormy sky. "Margaret painted," he said quietly. Nothing formal, just Sunday afternoons with a small set of acrylics. She captured moments rather than scenes, a child's hand reaching for a butterfly, rain beating on a window, steam rising from coffee. I still have them all, though it took me years before I could look at them without weeping. The intimacy of this revelation, offered without preamble in the midst of market bustle, caught me by surprise. "She sounds like she truly saw the world," I said, recognizing the gift of his confidence. He nodded. "She did. She taught me to see it too." He gestured toward the artist's displays. "What draws you to painting, Eleanor? Why not photography or sculpture or another medium?" I considered the question seriously, realizing no one had ever asked me about this nascent passion in such a thoughtful way. "Color," I finally said, "the way it can express emotion directly, bypassing words entirely. As a librarian, I spent my life immersed in language, helping others navigate information. But there are feelings, experiences, that resist verbal expression." "And now you're learning a new vocabulary," Marcus suggested, his eyes warm with understanding. "Exactly," I agreed, surprised and pleased by his insight. "A vocabulary of light and shadow, form and space. I'm still at the awkward stage, like a toddler learning to speak, more intent than eloquent." He laughed, a rich sound that drew smiles from nearby browsers. "A perfect analogy. And like language acquisition, I suspect improvement comes through practice and immersion rather than worry about mistakes." "I hope so," I said, thinking of my accumulated decades of caution and perfectionism. "I'm trying to embrace imperfection, to see value in the attempt rather than just the outcome." "A worthy philosophy for art and life," Marcus observed. He checked his watch. "Would you care to extend our market adventure to include lunch? There's a lovely cafe just across the street with a courtyard that might inspire your artistic eye." I hesitated only briefly, considering Emma's text about possibly meeting. But she hadn't confirmed, and I refused to put my life on hold waiting for my family's intermittent attention. "I'd like that very much," I replied. The cafe proved as charming as promised, a hidden courtyard shaded by ancient live oaks, tables arranged around a small fountain where water played over moss-covered stones. Over shrimp and grits for Marcus and a fresh crab salad for me, our conversation ranged widely from books we'd loved to places we'd traveled, the challenges of downsizing decades of possessions, and our shared appreciation of jazz. What we didn't discuss by tacit agreement were the circumstances that had brought us to our current situations. I offered no details about Melissa's betrayal, and he asked for none. The absence of pressure to explain or justify my presence in Charleston was itself a kind of freedom, the liberty to be known for who I was becoming rather than what I had escaped. After lunch, Marcus walked me back to the Palmetto house, pausing at the wrought iron gate that separated the garden from the street. "I've enjoyed your company today, Eleanor," he said, suddenly seeming slightly uncertain, a contrast to his usual easy confidence. "I host a small dinner gathering every other week, just 4 or 5 friends for good food and conversation. Would you consider joining us this Friday?" "I'd be delighted," I replied, genuinely pleased by the invitation. "Excellent." He smiled, relief visible in the relaxation of his shoulders. "I'll pick you up at 7, if that suits you." We said our goodbyes, and I climbed the steps to the veranda, aware of a lightness in my movements that had been absent for too long. Nothing momentous had occurred, just pleasant conversation with a kind man who asked nothing of me beyond my company. Yet it felt significant. This simple social connection formed entirely on my own terms. Inside my apartment, I found a text message from Emma. "Can't get away today. Mom's watching me like a hawk. Maybe next weekend?" I sent a quick reply. Whenever. Works for you. I'm not going anywhere. Then set my phone aside, refusing to let disappointment dim the day's enjoyment. Instead, I opened my sketchbook and began drawing, trying to capture the play of light through oak branches in the cafe courtyard, the weathered patina of the fountain stones, the feeling of quiet contentment I'd experienced there. The results were imperfect, certainly, but I found myself less frustrated by the gap between vision and execution than I might have been even a week earlier. Progress, I reminded myself, comes through practice and immersion rather than worry about mistakes. Sunday morning brought a welcome invitation to brunch with Vivian and Rebecca at their apartment just a few blocks from the Palmetto House. Their home reflected their academic backgrounds and artistic sensibilities, bookcases lining every available wall, mid-century modern furniture interspersed with artifacts from their global travels, and a balcony overflowing with potted herbs and flowering plants. Rebecca, tall and elegant with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, greeted me with the easy warmth of someone accustomed to building intellectual communities. "Vivian tells me you're exploring watercolor," she said as she poured mimosas. "I teach art history at the college, focusing on American women artists of the 20th century. Such fascinating work emerging from lives often constrained by societal expectations." The conversation flowed from there, touching on everything, from Georgia O'Keeffe's revolutionary perspectives to the challenges facing older women artists in contemporary markets. I found myself engaged in a level of intellectual discourse I hadn't experienced since my book club friends had gradually dispersed from Burlington, leaving me increasingly isolated in the years before my retirement. "You must join us for the gallery openings on Friday Art Walk," Vivian insisted as we lingered over coffee and Rebecca's homemade scones. The quarter teems with artists, collectors, wine, and passionate arguments about technique and meaning. It's gloriously stimulating. "I'd love to," I said, "though I've already committed to dinner with Marcus this Friday." Vivian and Rebecca exchanged a meaningful glance I couldn't quite interpret. "Marcus Thibodeau?" Vivian asked. "From the Palmetto House?" "Yes," I confirmed, suddenly self-conscious. "He invited me to a small dinner gathering he hosts." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Marcus is highly regarded in Charleston's culinary circles. His restaurant, Gullah Heritage, was among the first to elevate traditional low-country cuisine to fine dining status. The dinner will be exceptional." "I didn't realize," I admitted, surprised to learn this detail about my new friend. "He mentioned owning a restaurant in Atlanta, but not here in Charleston. He sold the Atlanta establishment after Margaret passed," Vivian explained. "Opened Gullah Heritage about 2 years ago as a tribute to his grandmother's recipes. It's quite the local treasure." This new information added dimension to my understanding of Marcus, his professional accomplishments, his continued connection to his roots, his transformation of grief into creative expression. I found myself looking forward to Friday with increased anticipation. Monday morning brought my appointment with Dr. Eleanor Gadsden at MUSC's Geriatric Assessment Clinic. Despite Marjorie's assurances about the process, I felt a flutter of anxiety as I checked in at the reception desk. The necessity of proving my cognitive soundness to protect myself from my own daughter's manipulations seemed a particularly cruel irony. Dr. Gadsden, however, immediately put me at ease. A woman about my age with kind eyes behind stylish glasses and a manner that balanced professional authority with genuine warmth. "I understand from Marjorie Simmons that you're seeking a capacity evaluation for legal protective purposes," she said once we were settled in her office. "Yes," I confirmed. "My daughter has expressed intentions to seek guardianship on grounds of cognitive decline that doesn't exist, but would serve her financial interests if established." Dr. Gadsden nodded, her expression compassionate but not pitying. "Financial exploitation of elders is unfortunately common, even within families. You're wise to be proactive." She outlined the evaluation process, standardized cognitive assessments, functional capacity measures, and a clinical interview to establish judgment and decision-making abilities. The goal isn't to determine if you're experiencing normal age-related changes, she explained. Most of us in our 60s notice some differences in processing speed or occasional word-finding difficulties. The question is whether any such changes significantly impact your ability to manage your affairs and make sound decisions about your welfare. The evaluation itself proved less stressful than anticipated. I completed various tests measuring memory, attention, reasoning, and problem-solving skills, performing well within expected parameters for my age and education level. The functional assessment confirmed my ability to manage medications, finances, transportation, and other independent living requirements. Throughout the process, Dr. Gadsden maintained a collegial rather than clinical approach, treating me as a peer rather than a patient, a refreshing change from the subtle condescension I'd increasingly encountered in recent years. Based on today's comprehensive evaluation, she concluded as we wrapped up, I can state unequivocally that you demonstrate intact cognitive function consistent with normal aging, with no evidence of impairment that would affect your capacity for independent decision-making. Relief washed through me, though I recognized the absurdity of feeling validated for capacities I'd never doubted. Thank you, I said simply. I'll prepare a formal report for Attorney Simmons, Dr. Gadsden continued. Should your daughter proceed with guardianship efforts, this documentation will provide strong evidence against her claims. She paused, removing her professional glasses in a gesture that shifted our interaction from clinical to personal. If you don't mind my asking, what prompted you to anticipate this situation? I hesitated, then shared a condensed version of recent events. My move to Charleston, the overheard conversation, my departure from Melissa's home. I still can't quite believe it's happening, I admitted. That my own child would attempt to seize control of my finances under the guise of protection. Dr. Gadsden nodded, her expression reflecting both understanding and indignation on my behalf. Family dynamics can become particularly complicated around aging and finances. Your generation often sacrificed personal ambitions for the benefit of your children, creating expectations about continued sacrifice that may not align with your own vision for later life. Her insight struck a chord. Yes, I agreed. Melissa seems to view my artistic interests as frivolous, my financial independence as somehow selfish. Yet your cognitive evaluation shows excellent judgment regarding financial management, Dr. Sau, Gadsden observed. You've taken appropriate steps to secure your assets while maintaining reasonable living expenses. That's not frivolity. It's responsible stewardship of resources you worked decades to accumulate. Her validation of both my financial decisions and my right to pursue personal interests strengthened my resolve. As I left her office, I felt armored not just with legal documentation, but with renewed confidence in my choices. The remainder of the week passed in a rhythm that was becoming comfortably familiar. Mornings at the Palmetto House for breakfast, often with Vivian and occasionally other residents. Days spent exploring Charleston, visiting galleries, or attending workshops at the Cultural Center, where I'd enrolled in a 6-week watercolor course specifically designed for beginners. Evenings of quiet contemplation in my studio, or small gatherings in the common areas with my expanding circle of acquaintances. I heard nothing further from Melissa, though I suspected the silence reflected strategic calculation rather than acceptance of my independence. Emma texted once, a photo of a painting she'd created in her art class accompanied by the message, "Thinking of you," a small connection that gave me hope our relationship might weather the current storm. Friday evening arrived. With a gentle knock at my door precisely at 7, Marcus stood in the hallway, elegant in charcoal slacks and a crisp light blue shirt, holding a small bundle of sweetgrass flowers tied with a simple ribbon. "These reminded me of your sketches," he explained. handling them to me with a slightly self-conscious smile. "The coastal grasses you captured so beautifully in your notebook." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, noticing not just my artistic efforts but the specific subjects that interested me, touched me deeply. "They're perfect," I said, genuinely moved. "Let me put them in water before we go." Marcus's home proved to be a stunning revelation, a Greek Revival residence on Lagar Street in the heart of Charleston's historic district, its facade distinguished by soaring columns and a deep piazza overlooking a formal garden where fountains played among precisely trimmed boxwoods and riot of flowering perennials. "This is where you live?" I asked, unable to disguise my surprise as he escorted me through a formal entry hall adorned with original artwork and antiques that managed to appear both valuable and comfortably personal. He chuckled at my reaction. "Most of the time, I have a small apartment above the restaurant for nights when service runs late, but this is home." He guided me toward the rear of the house, where French doors opened onto a brick terrace illuminated by string lights woven through the branches of a massive oak tree. It was Margaret's family home. Her people were old Charleston, rice planters generations back, then lawyers and judges once the plantations failed. A table set for 6 occupied the center of the terrace, its crisp white linen adorned with silver, candlesticks, fresh flowers, and place settings of delicate china that looked both valuable and well-used. 2 couples were already seated, engaged in animated conversation that paused as we approached. "Friends," Marcus announced warmly. "May I present Eleanor Wells, recently of Vermont, currently of the Palmetto House, and eternally of excellent taste, as evidenced by her willingness to join us this evening." The introductions flowed easily. James and Sophia Richardson, he a retired maritime lawyer, she the director of Charleston's Historical Preservation Society. David Chen and his husband Michael Torres, owners of a landscape architecture firm, responsible for restoring many of Charleston's historic gardens, including Marcus's own. "We're the Friday night regulars," Sophia explained as Marcus disappeared inside, presumably to attend to dinner preparations. "Started as a book club 20 years ago, evolved into a semi-permanent dinner arrangement after Marcus opened the restaurant, and we discovered his culinary talents extended beyond professional kitchens." Though we still discuss books, David T.I. added with a warm smile, "along with politics, art, local gossip, and whatever else captures our interest. Marcus mentioned you're a retired librarian exploring painting?" The conversation flowed naturally from there, encompassing my limited experience, with watercolors, Charleston's vibrant arts community, and book recommendations tailored to my expressed interests. I was struck by the group's easy inclusion of a newcomer, their genuine curiosity about my perspectives, and the absence of the subtle condescension I'd often encountered when identified primarily as Melissa's mother or the grandchildren's grandmother. Marcus emerged from the kitchen bearing a tray of elegant appetizers, tiny cornmeal blinis topped with pickled shrimp and microgreens, alongside flutes of champagne. "First course," he announced, with the quiet pride of someone who takes pleasure in nurturing others through food. A toast to new friends and fresh perspectives. The meal that followed was extraordinary. She crab soup served in delicate porcelain cups, red rice studded with sausage and seafood that Marcus explained was his grandmother's recipe refined through professional technique, greens that had been picked that morning from his kitchen garden, and for dessert, a buttermilk pie so light it seemed to evaporate on the tongue, leaving behind only the essence of comfort and care. Throughout the evening, I found myself fully present in a way that had become increasingly rare in recent years. The conversation challenged and engaged me, touching on everything from Charleston's complicated relationship with its historical legacy to contemporary art movements, local politics, and philosophical questions about identity and purpose in a later life. When James asked about my move to Charleston, I offered a simplified version: retirement, desire to be near grandchildren, discovery that living with family wasn't the right arrangement for me. I mentioned nothing about Melissa's betrayal or financial schemes, yet somehow felt Marcus understood the deeper story from the gentle way his gaze met mine across the table, communicating solidarity without requiring disclosure. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to depart, Sophia took my hands in hers. "You must join us for the Historical Society's garden tour next weekend," she insisted. 6 private gardens not normally open to the public, including 2 I'm particularly proud of restoring to their 19th century designs. "And come to dinner again," David added warmly. "We're always here on Fridays unless Marcus has a catering. Emergency or one of us is traveling. Consider yourself a standing member of the group." Their inclusion, offered without qualification or the need to prove myself worthy, filled a space inside me I hadn't fully recognized was empty. These people knew nothing of my past roles or relationships. They sought my company based solely on who I was in the present moment, a woman of certain interests and perspectives that they found worthwhile. After the others departed, Marcus and I lingered on the terrace, the candles burning low, the night air fragrant with jasmine and the distant salt tang of the harbor. "Your friends are lovely," I said, cradling a small glass of port he'd produced from some hidden reserve. "Thank you for including me." "They're good people," he agreed. "The kind who ask real questions and listen to the answers." He studied me across the flickering candlelight. "They liked you very much. Sophia texted me from the car to ensure you're invited to her garden event." I laughed, oddly touched by this behind-the-scenes affirmation. "I'd be delighted to attend. I could accompany you," he offered, then quickly added, "unless you'd prefer to go alone, of course." The slight uncertainty in his voice, the careful respect for my autonomy, confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that Marcus's interest in me extended beyond casual friendship. The realization brought a flutter of both excitement and trepidation. At 65, I hadn't expected to navigate the tentative beginnings of romantic interest again. Yet here it was, unfolding with the delicate care of new growth after long dormancy. "I'd enjoy your company," I replied, making my own careful choice of words. He nodded, seeming pleased but not presumptuous. "Then it's a date." The word hung in the air between us, neither confirmed nor denied, allowing space for possibility without demanding commitment. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of thoughtful consideration that had characterized all our interactions, an invitation offered freely, with no expectation beyond the pleasure of shared experience. As Marcus walked me back to the Palmetto house through Charleston's gas-lit streets, we maintained a companionable conversation about the city's architecture and history. At the wrought iron gate, he paused. "Thank you for coming tonight, Eleanor. Your presence enriched our gathering." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied simply. "It was a lovely evening." He hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. Brief, respectful, yet undeniably intentional. "Good night," he said softly, then turned and walked back toward Lagar Street, his stride unhurried but purposeful. I touched my fingers to the spot his lips had brushed, feeling simultaneously young and ancient, novice and sage, terrified and exhilarated by this unexpected development in my carefully reconstructed life. Inside my apartment, I opened my sketchbook and began to draw, not the bird outside its cage that had occupied my recent efforts, but something new, a garden gate, standing ajar, revealing just a glimpse of the lush possibility beyond. Not a headlong rush into unknown territory, but a deliberate step across a threshold I hadn't anticipated encountering at this stage of life. The resulting image was imperfect, certainly, the perspective slightly askew, the details less precise than I might have wished. Yet it captured something essential, the tentative hope, the quiet courage required to move forward into uncertainty after profound betrayal. I was still studying the drawing, considering its metaphorical implications, when my phone chimed with an email notification. Opening it, I found another message from Melissa's attorney, his tone more demanding than before, insisting on a meeting to discuss serious concerns about your living arrangements and financial decisions. I forwarded it to Marjorie without comment, refusing to allow Melissa's continued manipulations to overshadow the evening's quiet joy. Whatever legal maneuvers my daughter might attempt, I now stood on solid ground, financially, legally, and emotionally. I had created not just a new residence, but a new life, one rich with connections of my own choosing and possibilities unfolding on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, certainly. But tonight, I chose to focus on the threshold I had crossed, the garden gate standing ajar, and the unexpected flourishing that sometimes emerges from even the most painful uprooting. 3 months passed in the gentle rhythm of a Charleston summer. July's oppressive heat gave way to August's tropical storm warnings, which in turn yielded to September's more temperate breezes. Through it all, my new life took shape like a watercolor gradually revealing its composition, each day adding depth, texture, and definition to what had begun as merely an outline of possibility. The Palmetto House remained my official residence, though I spent increasing time at Marcus's home on Lagar Street. Our relationship had evolved with the careful deliberation of two people who had known both love and loss, neither rushing nor resisting the natural progression from friendship to something deeper. We attended concerts at the Gaillard Center, explored hidden gardens on weekend mornings, and spent quiet evenings on his terrace discussing books, sharing memories, and contemplating futures neither of us had anticipated. I never expected this, Marcus confessed one evening as we sat side by side on his porch swing, hands linked loosely between us. After Margaret died, I assumed that chapter of my life was complete. I would have my work, my friends, my memories, but nothing new, nothing surprising. I know exactly what you mean, I replied, watching fireflies rise from the garden like earthbound stars ascending. At 65, I thought I was finishing my story, not beginning a new one. My artistic endeavors had progressed from tentative sketches to more confident explorations in watercolor. The 6-week beginner course at the Cultural Center led to an intermediate class where I discovered an unexpected affinity for capturing Charleston's distinctive architecture. The play of light across piazzas, wrought iron gates framing lush gardens, church steeples piercing cloud-scattered skies. To my astonishment, my instructor, Larissa Beauchamp, had suggested I submit work to a small gallery show featuring emerging local artists. "Your perspective is fresh," she insisted when I protested that I was hardly qualified. "You see architectural details others overlook, and your color choices evoke emotional responses rather than literal representation. That's genuine artistic vision, regardless of your technical experience." With trepidation and Marcus's encouraging support, I submitted 3 watercolors to the selection committee. The acceptance letter, when it arrived, left me simultaneously elated and terrified. My work, my novice, imperfect efforts, would hang alongside pieces created by trained artists with years of experience. They wouldn't have selected your submissions if they didn't merit inclusion, Marcus reminded me when doubt threatened to overwhelm my excitement. Art isn't about technical perfection. It's about authentic expression, about seeing the world in ways others might miss. Throughout these months of artistic and personal growth, Melissa maintained her campaign of legal pressure and emotional manipulation. Her attorneys sent increasingly aggressive letters demanding meetings, financial disclosures, and most recently, a professional evaluation of my concerning behavior and sudden lifestyle changes. Each communication arrived like a dark cloud briefly, shadowing an otherwise sunlit day, then dissipated as I forwarded it to Marjorie without engaging directly. Emma reached out sporadically, our text exchanges brief but meaningful. She shared snippets of her life, a good grade on an English essay, a painting accepted for the school art show, a funny anecdote about her brother. I responded with encouragement and affection, careful never to disparage her parents while maintaining firm boundaries around my own choices. "Mom says you're being stubborn," she texted one evening. "She says you need to talk to her lawyers because they're worried about you." "I'm not stubborn, just independent," I replied, choosing my words with care. "My attorney is handling any legal matters. I hope you know I'm doing very well and miss you and Aiden very much." Her response came after a long pause. "Can I see where you live sometime? Mom says it's probably terrible, but I want to see for myself." My heart leaped at this opening. "Of course. I'd love to show you my apartment and introduce you to some of my new friends. Maybe we could have lunch afterward." The plans took 2 weeks to arrange. Emma, now 15, had developed sufficient autonomy to insist on seeing me despite her parents' objections. The compromise involved Melissa driving her to the Palmetto house but remaining in the car while Emma visited briefly. "Just to verify your living conditions," Melissa had reportedly said, as if I were residing in some questionable establishment, requiring inspection. The morning of Emma's visit, I prepared my studio apartment with particular care, arranging fresh flowers on the windowsill, setting out a selection of pastries from Marcus's restaurant, displaying my recent watercolors on easels borrowed from the cultural center. Though my quarters were modest compared to Melissa and Greg's expansive home, I had transformed the space into a genuine reflection of my emerging self, books and art supplies occupying pride of place, walls adorned with local artwork purchased from the farmer's market, comfortable furnishings arranged to maximize both function and aesthetics. At precisely 11, a knock came at my door. Opening it revealed Emma standing uncertainly in the hallway, her adolescent frame caught in that poignant transition between child and young woman. Her eyes, so like her father's, widened as she took in the apartment behind me. "Grandma," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "This is actually really nice." Relief and joy surged through me as I welcomed her inside. "It's not as spacious as your home," I acknowledged, "but it suits me perfectly." Emma moved slowly around the studio, examining the watercolors on display, running her fingers along the spines of books arranged on shelves, peering out the window at the garden below. "Mom said," she began, then stopped herself. "I thought it would be sad and small. But it's actually beautiful." "Thank you," I said simply, watching her absorb the physical evidence of my independent life. "And these are yours?" she asked, gesturing toward the watercolors. "They're really good, Grandma." "I'm still learning," I replied, unable to suppress a smile at her approval. "But yes, I painted those. In fact, 3 of my pieces will be in a gallery show next month." Emma's eyes widened. "Like a real gallery? With other artists and everything?" "A real gallery," I confirmed. "Small but legitimate. Would you like to come to the opening night reception? Your brother too, of course." She bit her lip, uncertainty clouding her expression. "I don't know if Mom and Dad would let us." "Perhaps I could speak with them," I suggested, though the prospect of direct communication with Melissa after months of legal intermediaries filled me with trepidation. Emma shook her head. "They're still really angry. Dad especially. He says you embarrassed them in front of everyone and abandoned us when they needed you." The accusation stung, though I'd anticipated similar messages were being conveyed to my grandchildren. "I'm sorry they feel that way," I said carefully. "But I hope you know I never abandoned you or Aiden. I simply needed to establish my own independent life." "Why, though?" Emma asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Weren't you happy living with us?" The question deserved an honest answer, carefully, framed for a 15-year-old's understanding without demonizing her parents. "I was happy being near you and Aiden," I said, choosing my words with care. "But your parents and I had very different expectations about my retirement. They viewed me primarily as someone who could help with household tasks and childcare, while I was hoping to finally pursue interests I'd postponed for decades." "Like painting," Emma said, glancing again at the watercolors. Like painting, I agreed. And exploring Charleston, making new friends, learning new skills, all the things that make this stage of life fulfilling for me. Those differences created tension that made living together uncomfortable for everyone. Emma nodded slowly, absorbing this diplomatic version of events. Mom says you're wasting all your money on art supplies and fancy dinners with some old man. Suppressed a smile at this characterization of Marcus. I'm managing my finances very responsibly, I assured her. And yes, I do spend some money on art supplies, as well as occasionally dining out with friends, including a gentleman I've been seeing. These are normal expenses for an independent adult. Are you, dating him? Emma asked, typical teenage directness breaking through her uncertainty. This time I did smile. Yes, I suppose I am. His name is Marcus. He owns a restaurant here in Charleston and has become a very important person in my life. Emma's eyebrows rose almost to her hairline. That's kind of amazing, Grandma, and a little weird, but in a cool way. Our conversation continued for another hour, ranging from Emma's school activities to my art classes, her tentative interest in photography, to my growing involvement with Charleston's cultural community. As noon approached, bringing with it Melissa's expected return, Emma grew visibly anxious. I wish we had more time, she said, glancing at her phone. Mom's going to be here any minute. We can arrange another visit, I suggested, trying to project more confidence than I felt about the possibility. And perhaps next time, Aiden could join us. Emma nodded, then impulsively wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug. I miss you, she whispered against my shoulder. It's not the same without you. I miss you too, sweetheart, I replied, returning her embrace with equal fervor. More than I can say. As we separated, Emma reached into her backpack and withdrew a small package, wrapped in tissue paper. I made this for you, she said, suddenly shy. In my photography class. I unwrapped the gift carefully to reveal a framed black and white photograph of the magnolia tree in Melissa's backyard. The same tree I had been sketching the day I overheard the conversation that changed everything. The composition was striking, capturing the sculptural quality of the branches against a moody sky, a single blossom in sharp focus while others blurred artistically in the background. Emma, this is extraordinary, I said, genuinely moved by both the technical quality of the image and its emotional significance. You have a remarkable eye. She shrugged, pleased but self-conscious about the praise. Maybe it runs in the family, she suggested with a small smile. Maybe creative stuff skips a generation or something. The observation, innocent yet perceptive, highlighted the fundamental disconnect between Melissa's practical, achievement-oriented worldview and the artistic sensibilities Emma and I shared. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Mom's outside, she said, reluctance evident in her voice. I have to go. I walked her to the door, then hesitated. Would you like me to come down with you? I could say hello to your mother. Emma's eyes widened in alarm. Probably not a good idea, she said quickly. She's still really upset about everything. I nodded, accepting her assessment. Another time, perhaps. Thank you for visiting today, Emma. It meant the world. To me. She hugged me once more, then hurried down the hallway toward the stairs, turning back at the last moment. I'll definitely try to come to your gallery thing, she called. And I'll tell Aiden about it too. After she departed, I placed her photograph on my windowsill where the light would illuminate its nuanced tones. The visit had been both healing and heartbreaking, connection re-established, yet the gulf between my daughter and me seemingly wider than ever. The remainder of September passed. In a flurry of preparation for the gallery show, scheduled for the first Friday in October, I finished 2 additional pieces specifically for the exhibition, selected frames with Larissa's guidance, and even consented to having my photograph and a brief artist statement included in the show's promotional materials. Eleanor Wells, 65. Discovered her passion for watercolor after relocating to Charleston from Vermont earlier this year. The gallery's press release read, "Her architectural studies capture the soul of Charleston's historic buildings through emotionally resonant color choices and distinctive compositional perspectives." Seeing myself described as an artist, not an aspiring or amateur artist, but simply an artist, sent a thrill of both terror and delight through me. Who was this Eleanor Wells claiming space in a legitimate gallery? How had she emerged so quickly from the woman who had arrived in Charleston just 6 months earlier, uncertain and betrayed? The questions lingered as I stood beside Marcus on opening night, wearing a new dress in a shade of blue he said matched my eyes, watching strangers examine my work with the focused attention of genuine interest. "They're responding to your unique perspective," Marcus murmured, his hand warm against the small of my back. "You see Charleston through fresh eyes, unclouded by familiarity." The gallery buzzed with conversation and laughter, glasses of wine in hand as visitors moved from piece to piece. Vivian and Rebecca had arrived early, offering enthusiastic support and introducing me to their colleagues from the College of Charleston. Sophia and James Richardson appeared midway through the evening, bringing with them several friends from the Historical Preservation Society. "Your watercolor of the Edmonston Alston house captures details I've never noticed, despite having conducted tours there for 15 years, Sophia exclaimed, studying my rendering of the historic home's distinctive piazza. "You have an extraordinary gift for architectural essence." I was explaining my technique to an interested couple when Marcus touched my elbow gently. "Eleanor," he said quietly, nodding toward the gallery entrance, "I believe you have more supporters arriving." I turned to see Emma and Aidan standing, uncertainly in the doorway, scanning the crowded space with visible anxiety. Without hesitation, I moved toward them, heart pounding with surprise and joy. "You came," I said, embracing first Emma, then 17-year-old Aidan, who had grown at least 2 inches since I'd last seen him. "I can't believe you're here." "We took an Uber," Emma explained in a rush. "Mom and Dad think we're at a school function. I know that's kind of lying, but—" She trailed off, her expression both defiant and uncertain. "I'm just so happy to see you both," I said, choosing not to dwell on the deception. "Come, let me show you around, introduce you to some people." As I guided my grandchildren through the gallery, introducing them to my new friends and explaining my artistic process, I felt a completion of sorts, the painful rupture with Melissa, somewhat balanced by this reconnection with her children, who had made such significant effort to support me. "Those are yours?" Aidan asked, gesturing toward my displayed watercolors with undisguised surprise. "They're really good, Grandma. Like professional level good." "Thank you," I replied, warmed by his obvious sincerity. "I'm still learning, but I've discovered I love the process almost as much as the results." "That's how I feel about my music," he said thoughtfully. "Dad keeps saying it's just a hobby, that I need to focus on real subjects for college applications, but—" He shrugged, leaving the parallel unspoken but clear. Before I could respond, Marcus approached, carrying 3 flutes of sparkling cider. "I thought our younger guests might appreciate a celebratory beverage," he said, offering the glasses with a warm smile. "You must be Emma and Aidan. Your grandmother speaks of you often and with great pride." The introductions flowed naturally. From there, Marcus displaying his gift for putting others at ease through genuine interest and well-chosen questions. Within minutes, he had drawn out Aidan's passion for jazz saxophone and Emma's growing interest in photography, establishing connections based on shared artistic sensibilities. As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by a circle of care I had created entirely on my own terms. New friends who valued me for precisely who I was, grandchildren bridging the divide between past and present, and Marcus, whose steady presence anchored me in this unexpected chapter of life. The final surprise of the evening came as guests were beginning to depart. I stood near the gallery entrance, thanking visitors for attending, when I noticed a familiar figure lingering near the back wall where my architectural watercolors were displayed. Greg. My son-in-law stood alone, studying my painting of St. Michael's Church with an expression I couldn't quite decipher from a distance. He hadn't noticed me observing him, his attention fully absorbed by the artwork. After a moment's hesitation, I approached him, moving quietly until I stood just behind his right shoulder. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said simply. He startled slightly, then composed himself, turning to face me with the careful neutrality he employed during difficult business negotiations. "I didn't expect to be here," he admitted. "But when the kids insisted they needed to attend a school event tonight, I became suspicious. It wasn't difficult to discover where they'd actually gone." "I see," I replied, maintaining my own composure. "Did you come to take them home?" Greg glanced across the gallery to where Emma and Aiden stood with Marcus, engaged in animated conversation. About jazz musicians, judging by Aiden's characteristic hand gestures mimicking saxophone playing. "Initially, yes," he said slowly. "But then I saw this." He gestured toward my painting. "St. Michael's was where Melissa and I were married. The light you've captured here, it's exactly how it looked that day, streaming through the windows during the ceremony." He paused, seeming to search for words. "You have genuine talent, Eleanor. I didn't expect that." The backhanded compliment exemplified Greg's worldview. Surprised that something he had dismissed as frivolous could hold actual value. Yet beneath the condescension, I detected a faint note of something else, perhaps recognition, or even regret. "Thank you," I said simply, neither challenging his assumptions nor seeking further approval. Greg shifted uncomfortably, glancing again toward his children. "They miss you," he said abruptly. "The house feels different without you there." I waited, sensing more beneath this admission. "Melissa won't admit it, but she misses you too," he continued after a moment. "Though she's still furious about how you left, the accusations you made." "They weren't accusations, Greg. They were direct quotations of conversations I overheard." He had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "We were under tremendous financial pressure at the time. The market correction hit our investments hard, and with college expenses looming." He stopped himself, straightening his shoulders slightly. "That's no excuse, of course. We shouldn't have discussed those matters the way we did." "No," I agreed calmly. "You shouldn't have." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, broken finally by Greg's deep sigh. "The attorney was Melissa's idea," he said, as if offering a peace gesture. "I told her it was excessive, that we should simply talk to you directly. But you know how she gets when she feels she's been wronged." I did indeed know. My daughter had inherited her father's analytical mind, but not his tempering compassion. Once convinced of her position, she pursued it with relentless determination, regardless of emotional cost. "The legal notices can stop," I said firmly. "I've established my independence, secured my finances, and built a life that fulfills me. Nothing will change that now." Greg nodded slowly. "I'll speak with Melissa. Perhaps we can find a more amicable approach moving forward, for the children's sake, if nothing else." It wasn't an apology, nor a full recognition of the harm they had intended. But it was an acknowledgement of my new reality, a tentative acceptance that the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. "For the children's sake," I agreed. "That would be best." He hesitated, then extended his hand formally, as if concluding a business arrangement. "Your work is impressive, Eleanor. Truly." I accepted the handshake briefly, releasing it without lingering. "The children should stay and enjoy the remainder of the evening," I suggested. "I can arrange transportation home for them later if you'd like to go." Relief flickered across his features. He had achieved his diplomatic mission and could now gracefully exit what was clearly an uncomfortable situation for him. "That would be appreciated. I'll let Melissa know they're safe and will be home by 11. After Greg departed, I rejoined my grandchildren and Marcus, offering no explanation for the conversation they had undoubtedly observed from across the gallery. This evening belonged to celebration, not to dissecting complex family dynamics. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked quietly as Aiden enthusiastically described a jazz performance he hoped to attend the following weekend. "Better than expected," I replied truthfully. "A small step toward something more workable, perhaps." The remainder of the evening passed in a glow of quiet joy. The success of the exhibition evidenced by several red sold dots appearing beside my watercolors, the pleasure of introducing my grandchildren to my new community, the warm pride in Marcus's eyes as he watched me navigate this milestone with increasing confidence. After arranging for a car service to take Emma and Aiden home, I embraced them both fiercely on the sidewalk outside the gallery. "This meant everything to me," I told them, voice thick with emotion. "Having you here tonight, sharing this with you." "We're proud of you, Grandma," Aiden said, his adolescent awkwardness momentarily yielding to genuine sentiment. "For the art stuff, but also for, standing up for yourself and making your own life. It's pretty badass, actually." Emma nodded emphatic agreement. "And we like Marcus," she added with the direct assessment of youth. "He's really cool for an old person. No offense." I laughed, loving them so deeply in that moment it felt like my heart might burst with it. "None taken, and thank you both. Your support means more than you can possibly know." After they departed, Marcus and I walked arm in arm back to his home on Laguerre Street, the October evening pleasantly cool as we strolled beneath live oaks and gas lamps. "I have something for you," he said as we settled on his terrace, the garden illuminated by soft landscape lighting. "A small celebration of your gallery debut." From beside his chair, he produced a flat package wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with twine. "It's not fancy," he cautioned as I began to unwrap it, "but it made me think of you." Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, its cover embossed. With a simple design of magnolia blossoms, the pages heavy cream-colored paper ideal for watercolor. A simple brass plate affixed to the cover bore a single word: "Flourish." "It's perfect," I said, deeply touched by both the gift itself and the thoughtfulness behind it. "Thank you." "I had it custom-made by a bookbinder on King Street," Marcus explained. "I wanted something that reflected both where you've been and where you're going." "Flourish," I repeated, running my fingers over the engraved word. "That's exactly what this feels like. Not just surviving transplantation, but actually thriving because of it." Marcus nodded, reaching across to take my hand in his. "When I lost Margaret, I thought I was finished with new beginnings," he said quietly. "Then you arrived, with your watercolors and your courage and your beautiful way of seeing the world, and suddenly there was possibility again." The depth of feeling in his voice matched the warmth unfurling in my own chest. This unexpected gift of connection at a stage of life when such discoveries seemed improbable, if not impossible. "I never planned any of this," I admitted, gesturing vaguely to encompass the gallery show, our relationship, my new community. When I left Melissa's home that day, I was simply trying to protect myself, to preserve some small portion of the future I'd imagined. "And instead, you found something larger," Marcus suggested, his eyes reflecting starlight and understanding. "Yes," I agreed softly. "Something far larger than I dared hope for." We sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the fountain's gentle music, the distant church bells marking the hour, the subtle symphony of a Charleston night. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the shock of betrayal to the quiet triumph of this evening, from desperate escape to purposeful creation. My daughter had called me a burden, had attempted to reduce me to nothing more than financial resources to be managed and manipulated. In response, I had packed light, taking only what I could carry in a single trip, leaving behind the weight of others' expectations and constraints. Yet paradoxically, I had left with everything that truly mattered: my dignity, my autonomy, my capacity for joy and growth. More remarkable still, I had discovered treasures I hadn't known to seek: deep friendship, renewed creativity, unexpected romance, and the precious gift of reinvention when I had assumed such possibilities were behind me. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said softly, bringing me back to the present moment. I smiled, feeling a peace that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with self-reclamation. I was just thinking that sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of a better one. "And this is a beautiful beginning," he replied, raising my hand to his lips in a gesture both courtly and deeply sincere. "Yes," I agreed, my heart full with the knowledge that at 65, I had found not the diminishment I had feared, but an expansion I had never anticipated. The most beautiful beginning imaginable.